celebrated detective known for solving the toughest cases wakes up in a nightmare. A blood-soaked room, a murder weapon in hand, and no memory of how they got there. Could this be the ultimate betrayal? How does a hero become the prime suspect in their own investigation? What you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty, trust, and justice. Detective Jacob Steele, a name synonymous with justice, brilliance, and resolve. For 2 decades, his instincts and relentless pursuit of truth had brought criminals to their knees. He was the man you called when the trail went cold, the man who solved the unsolvable. But on the morning of February 3rd, everything changed. Jacob Steele woke up in a room he didn't recognize. Blood covered his hands, his clothes, and the floor beneath him. At his side lay a knife, its blade stained crimson. Across the room, a lifeless body. The victim? A local journalist with ties to Steele's latest case. There was no sign of forced entry, no witnesses, no clear explanation, and perhaps most disturbing of all, Jacob Steele had no memory of how he got there. The man celebrated for his clarity of mind was now trapped in a fog of confusion. A decorated detective, now the prime suspect in a gruesome murder. Could he have done this? Or had someone orchestrated a plan so meticulous, so personal, that even he, one of the best minds in law enforcement, was caught completely off guard? This is the story of a detective's descent into the unknown. A story of betrayal, deception, and a race against time to uncover the truth. What happened in that room? And why would anyone go to such lengths to frame Jacob Steele? What you are about to witness will test the limits of loyalty, truth, and the fragile line between justice and vengeance. This is The Framed Detective. Detective Jacob Steele wasn't just respected. He was revered. Over the course of 20 years, Steele had earned a reputation as the man who could crack cases others wouldn't dare touch. From dismantling organized crime syndicates to unraveling the motives of elusive serial killers, his success rate was the envy of departments nationwide. A decorated officer, Steele was often called the architect of justice, methodically piecing together even the most shattered puzzles. "He's one of the sharpest minds I've ever worked with," said Captain Evelyn Reed, Steele's former commanding officer. Jacob wasn't just good, he was relentless. But on February 3rd, everything Steele had built came crashing down. It began in an unassuming apartment on the east side of town. Steele woke up on the cold, hard floor, his breathing uneven, his head pounding. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, only to be met with a sight that would haunt him forever. His own hands, covered in blood, near his feet lay a knife, the blade still wet. Across the room was the body of Owen Langley, a well-known investigative journalist. Langley had been stabbed multiple times. The walls bore faint, chaotic smears of blood, as if a struggle had taken place. And Steele? He couldn't recall how he got there. It didn't make sense. Steele would later say during a recorded statement, "I couldn't explain it. One moment I was in my car, and the next, I was there." The evidence told a different story. Steele's fingerprints were all over the murder weapon. His DNA was found on Langley's clothes. And as investigators combed through the apartment, they found more damning clues. Steele's badge tucked beneath the victim's desk, and a series of text messages linking the two men. Langley wasn't just any victim. He was a journalist known for his fearless exposés on corruption within the city, politicians, corporations, even law enforcement. 2 weeks prior to his death, Langley had begun investigating a case that Steele had worked on. A case that, in hindsight, might have put the detective on a collision course with danger. "I didn't kill Owen Langley, but someone clearly wanted it to look like I did." The stakes couldn't have been higher. For Jacob Steele, this wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about preserving a legacy built on decades of service, trust, and integrity. But as evidence mounted and public scrutiny intensified, one question loomed larger than all others. Was Jacob Steele the architect of his own downfall, or had someone else meticulously orchestrated his undoing? This case would become one of the most controversial in Bridgeport's history, pulling back the curtain on secrets no one was prepared to confront. And as the pieces began to fall into place, it became clear this wasn't just a story about murder. It was about betrayal, manipulation, and the lengths people would go to destroy a man who thought he was untouchable. The evidence was damning. But was it too perfect? This case would test the boundaries of trust and justice, leaving everyone involved with more questions than answers. What happened in the days leading up to that fateful morning? And why would anyone want Owen Langley dead and Jacob Steele framed for his murder? Let's begin at the beginning, with a man who built his career on uncovering the truth, only to find himself at the center of a lie. To understand the events that unfolded on February 3rd, we must first understand the man at the center of it all. Jacob Steele wasn't just a detective. To Bridgeport, he was a symbol of justice, a relentless force that criminals feared and victims trusted. Born and raised in Bridgeport, Steele came from humble beginnings. The son of a schoolteacher and a factory worker, he learned early the value of hard work and resilience. After graduating at the top of his class from the academy, Steele quickly climbed the ranks, earning a reputation as someone who didn't back down, no matter the odds. His career was defined by cases that seemed insurmountable. There was the warehouse arsonist, a criminal who left no traces except for cryptic symbols at the crime scenes. Steele's sharp instincts led to an arrest that many believed was impossible. Then there was the Midtown stalker, a predator who evaded capture for years, until Steele connected the dots that others had missed. "Jacob was the best of us," said Detective Marcus Levin, Steele's longtime partner and closest confidant. "He saw patterns where others saw chaos. He was tireless, but that kind of dedication comes with a cost." Over the years, Steele's drive to seek justice earned him as many enemies as admirers. Organized crime families resented the man who dismantled their empires. Corrupt officials feared exposure under his relentless scrutiny. And criminals who once thought themselves untouchable found themselves behind bars, thanks to Steele's work. "He stepped on a lot of toes," said Captain Evelyn Reed. "When you're as good as Steele was, people take notice. And not all of them have good intentions." But Jacob Steele wasn't just a detective. He was a father, a widower, and a man haunted by his own ghosts. Steele's wife, Emily, passed away 5 years ago in a tragic car accident, leaving him to raise their teenage daughter, Claire, on his own. Despite his outward strength, those close to him saw the cracks beneath the surface. "He buried himself in his work after Emily died," said Claire Steele in a rare interview. "I think it was his way of coping, of not dealing with the grief." While his dedication to his job never wavered, those who knew him best noticed changes in recent months. Steele had grown quieter, more withdrawn. He was often seen working late into the night, poring over files in his dimly lit office. And then there were the arguments. Steele had clashed with his superiors over his unorthodox methods. Some in the department felt his relentless pursuit of justice made him reckless, even dangerous. But Steele wasn't entirely alone. Throughout his career, he relied on a small circle of trusted allies. There was Detective Marcus Levin, his steadfast partner, known for his calm demeanor and unshakable loyalty. Captain Evelyn Reed, who had mentored Steele from his early days. And then there was Amelia Cross, a criminal profiler who had worked alongside Steele on several cases and whose insight often proved invaluable. However, Steele's life wasn't without complications. His rivalry with Detective Ethan Price, a younger officer hungry for recognition, was well known within the department. Price often criticized Steele's methods, accusing him of bending the rules to achieve results. Jacob had this aura about him, said Price in a later interview. People thought he could do no wrong, but no one is above scrutiny. And then there was Owen Langley, the journalist whose murder would change everything. Langley had been working on a story involving police corruption, one that, according to sources, implicated high-ranking officials. Steele had known Langley professionally for years, but their relationship had grown strained in recent weeks. Owen told me he was onto something big, said a colleague of Langley's. He wouldn't say what, but he seemed nervous, almost like he knew he was playing with fire. With so many lives intersecting, so many tensions simmering beneath the surface, it's no surprise that the truth behind February 3rd remains tangled in a web of secrets and lies. Jacob Steele wasn't just a detective. He was a man surrounded by allies, rivals, and enemies, each with their own motives, their own agendas. And as investigators would soon discover, anyone could have had a reason to set Steele up for murder. But was Steele's impeccable record and ironclad reputation enough to shield him from the mounting evidence? Or had someone carefully engineered his downfall, exploiting the vulnerabilities only those closest to him would know? The room was small, no more than 200 square feet, yet it felt suffocating, a chilling tableau of violence and confusion. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, and in the center of it all, slumped lifelessly against the wall, was Owen Langley, the weapon. An 8-inch kitchen knife lay just inches from Jacob Steele's hand. The blade still bore traces of blood, its sheen catching the faint glow of a single flickering bulb overhead. Steele's fingerprints, unmistakably his, marred the hilt. Langley had been stabbed 6 times. Each wound was precise, deliberate, and fatal. The walls bore chaotic smears of blood, as though a struggle had taken place. Yet strangely, Steele bore no defensive wounds, no signs of a fight. The only sound in the room was Steele's ragged breathing as he came to. His head throbbed with pain, and the world seemed to tilt unsteadily around him. When his eyes finally adjusted to the dim light, the horrific scene before him didn't just terrify him, it paralyzed him. I didn't know where I was. I couldn't remember how I got there. It was like waking up in someone else's nightmare. Steele's memory was a fragmented puzzle. He remembered sitting in his car earlier that evening, reviewing case files. He remembered receiving a text, a vague message asking him to meet Langley. But beyond that, nothing. There was no sign of forced entry. The apartment door had been locked from the inside. Investigators would later find traces of a sedative in Steele's bloodstream, enough to impair memory, but not enough to incapacitate him entirely. For the first time in his storied career, Jacob Steele couldn't trust his own mind. The man who had spent decades unraveling the mysteries of others was now grappling with his own, a blank space in his memory that could hold the key to his innocence or his guilt. Owen Langley wasn't just a journalist. He was a force of nature, a man unafraid to challenge authority and expose the hidden truths of Bridgeport. Over the years, his investigative reporting had uncovered everything from corporate fraud to political scandals. But Langley wasn't without his detractors. His relentless pursuit of the truth earned him powerful enemies, figures in government, law enforcement, and the criminal underworld. And in recent months, Langley had been working on a story that he claimed would shake the city to its core. You know what they say, if you're not making enemies, you're not doing your job. And trust me, I've made plenty. Langley's connection to Steele was tenuous but significant. They had crossed paths years earlier when Langley reported on one of Steele's biggest cases, the arrest of mob boss Victor Caruso. At the time, their relationship was professional, even cordial. But recently, Langley's focus had shifted. Sources suggest that his latest investigation might have implicated members of the Bridgeport Police Department and perhaps even Steele himself. Owen said he had uncovered something big, recalled his editor, Margaret Wells. He wouldn't tell me what, but he seemed uneasy, almost like he was in over his head. As Steele sat across from investigators, his mind raced. Fragments of the night came in flashes. The text message, the drive, the faint smell of alcohol in the room. But nothing explained how he ended up there, or why he would have harmed Langley. It's like trying to piece together a shattered mirror, Steele later said. Every time I thought I had a memory, it would slip away. The sedative in his system provided a partial explanation, but it also raised questions. Who drugged him? And why? Steele's instincts told him he was being framed. But by whom? And for what purpose? Investigators uncovered additional evidence that seemed damning. Steele's badge tucked beneath Langley's desk, a set of text messages between the two men suggesting tension, and a bank deposit made to Steele's account just 2 days prior. A deposit Steele claimed to know nothing about. Every detail at the crime scene seemed to scream guilt. But was it all too convenient? The evidence against Steele was overwhelming, yet riddled with inconsistencies. The lack of defensive wounds, the sedative in his bloodstream, and the question no one could answer. Why would a celebrated detective with a spotless record suddenly murder an investigative journalist? As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just a case of murder. It was a meticulously crafted trap, one that would force Steele to confront not only his past, but also the enemies he didn't even know he had. Within hours of the crime, the Bridgeport Police Department had assembled a task force. Their focus was clear: unravel the events that led to Owen Langley's death. But as the evidence piled up, one thing became disturbingly clear. The prime suspect wasn't a nameless figure lurking in the shadows. It was one of their own. The evidence against Jacob Steele was, on the surface, airtight. His fingerprints covered the murder weapon. His DNA was found on Langley's body, and his presence at the scene was undeniable. Further examination of Steele's car revealed a small bottle of sedatives under the driver's seat, the same substance detected in his bloodstream. A text message on his phone read, "Meet me at 10. I need to talk. Langley." The timestamp placed Steele at the scene just minutes before the estimated time of death. To the outside world, the case seemed cut and dried. Steele had motive, means, and opportunity. But for those who knew him, the details raised more questions than answers. Within the department, Steele's arrest sent shockwaves. Jacob Steele wasn't just a detective. He was a mentor, a leader, a hero. But as the investigation progressed, the weight of the evidence began to erode even the staunchest support. "He's been like a brother to me," said Detective Laura Hayes, Steele's longtime partner. "But I can't ignore what's right in front of us." Others, however, stood firmly by Steele's side. Sergeant Mike Ramirez, who had worked with Steele for over a decade, dismissed the idea outright. "Jacob would never do this," Ramirez insisted. "If you think this man who spent his life putting criminals behind bars, could commit murder, then you don't know him at all." The department was divided. Steele's friends were forced to weigh years of trust against the damning reality of the evidence. And for Steele, the betrayal wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. As the investigation progressed, detectives began to consider alternate theories, possibilities that pointed away from Steele and toward something far more complex. One theory focused on Victor Caruso, a mob boss whose empire had crumbled thanks to Steele's relentless pursuit of justice. Caruso was currently serving a life sentence, but his influence remained vast. Could Langley's death and Steele's framing be a message from a vengeful underworld? Caruso's got the reach, the resources, and the grudge. If this isn't him, it's someone just like him. Another theory centered on Detective Ian Cartwright, a rising star within the department whose ambition was matched only by his animosity towards Steele. Colleagues described a tense relationship between the two men, marked by professional rivalries and personal clashes. Was Cartwright jealous of Steele's reputation? Or did he see an opportunity to remove an obstacle from his path? Everyone knew Ian had it out for Jacob. The question is, how far would he go? The final theory struck closer to home. Rachel Myers, Steele's ex-girlfriend and a forensic analyst, had recently re-entered his life. Their relationship had been turbulent, marked by unresolved tensions and lingering resentment. Rachel had worked on several of Steele's high-profile cases, including the takedown of Victor Caruso. Could her involvement in the investigation and her access to evidence have made her the perfect architect of Steele's downfall? Rachel's brilliant, but she's also complicated. If anyone could pull this off, it'd be her. The deeper investigators delved, the murkier the case became. Steele's guilt seemed undeniable until you scratched beneath the surface. Every piece of evidence told two stories. One of a celebrated detective who lost his way, and another of a man ensnared in a web of betrayal and revenge. With suspects emerging from every corner of Steele's life, the question wasn't just who framed him, but why. For a man who had spent his entire life upholding the law, breaking it was a bitter irony. Stripped of his badge and shunned by those he once trusted, Jacob Steele had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. Under the cover of night, Steele adopted a new role, not as a detective, but as a fugitive searching for the truth. With every passing day, the walls closed in tighter. Steele knew the risks. One misstep, and he'd be trading his search for freedom for a prison cell. But the only thing more dangerous than being hunted was doing nothing. To clear my name, I had to become someone else entirely, Steele later admitted. I had to think like the people I used to chase. The turning point came 2 weeks into Steele's covert investigation. Digging through old case files, he stumbled upon something chilling. A series of anonymous tips submitted to the precinct over the past year. Each one seemed innocuous at first glance, until Steele realized they all pointed to a single name, Rachel Myers. Myers had worked closely with Steele on countless cases, but these tips suggested she'd been withholding critical evidence. One anonymous letter even hinted at a secret relationship between Myers and Victor Caruso's right-hand man, Tony Del Luca. Had Rachel Myers betrayed Steele to protect herself? Or was she being manipulated by forces she couldn't control? In his search for answers, Steele tracked down Ellen Porter, a retired crime scene technician who had worked on Langley's murder. Porter had been quietly dismissed from the force just days after submitting a report that contradicted the official findings. Her revelation would change everything. I found fibers that didn't match anything in Steele's apartment. I reported it, but they told me to drop it. Next thing I know, I'm out of a job. Narrator. The fibers matched a distinctive fabric found only in the custom-tailored suits favored by Victor Caruso's enforcers. It was a link no one had dared to pursue until now. As Steele pieced together the puzzle, the danger grew. His every move was shadowed by unseen eyes. At one point, Steele narrowly avoided arrest when a tip-off led officers to a storage unit where he had been working. It felt like they were always one step ahead, Steele later said. Like someone was feeding them my every move. Moments of doubt gnawed at him. Was he chasing shadows? Was his desperation to prove his innocence blinding him to the truth? Steele began to question everything, even himself. But then came the breakthrough. An overlooked piece of surveillance footage from a neighboring building showed a figure entering Langley's apartment just minutes before the murder. The timestamp didn't match Steele's alibi, but it aligned perfectly with another suspect, Ian Cartwright. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial, it was damning. Cartwright had access, motive, and a history of animosity towards Steele. Now, Steele had to decide. Should he go to the police with his findings or confront Cartwright directly? The pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, but what Steele never anticipated was the depth of the betrayal that had been set in motion. In a case where everyone seemed a suspect, the truth was stranger than anyone could have imagined. The real villain wasn't some cold-hearted criminal or rival detective. It was someone who had been within arm's reach the entire time. The mastermind behind the framing? It wasn't Cartwright, despite the evidence that pointed in his direction. No, the true culprit was someone even closer to Steele. Someone he had trusted implicitly. Someone he had once called his friend. Rachel Myers, Steele's former confidant, had been playing a dangerous game all along. Beneath the surface of the meticulous forensic expert lay a woman consumed by envy and resentment. For years, she had watched Steele take the credit for solving case after case, basking in the limelight while she stayed behind the scenes. And it was that resentment that had driven her to orchestrate the perfect trap. She had manipulated every step of the investigation, planting evidence in Steele's apartment, framing him for a crime he didn't commit. But why? What was her motive? Rachel had been under Caruso's thumb for years, secretly laundering money and providing him with insider information about Steele's investigations. She had her own personal vendetta against Steele, but her true loyalty lay with the criminal empire that controlled the city. When Steele started closing in on Caruso's operations, Rachel saw the writing on the wall. She needed to eliminate him, once and for all. With the truth now clear, Steele had only one choice: confront Rachel directly. But he wasn't prepared for what would come next. The final confrontation wasn't going to be clean. There was too much at stake for either of them. "Rachel, I know what you've done. It's over." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Steele's mind raced through the years of camaraderie, the countless cases they had worked side by side, all the while unaware that he had been walking beside a traitor. Rachel's betrayal was a slow burn, a festering wound that had only now come to light. "You have no idea what it's like, Jacob. I spent my life in your shadow. You think you're better than everyone else, but you never even saw me." Rachel's words cut deeper than the gun in her hand. But Steele wasn't ready to back down. As he moved closer, he saw the cracks in her composure, her hand trembling, her resolve weakening. The years of manipulation had left her exposed, vulnerable. "It didn't have to be like this, Rachel. You could have come to me. I would have helped you." But just as Steele stepped forward to disarm her, a shot rang out. But it wasn't Rachel pulling the trigger. "You were always too slow, Jacob." Rachel couldn't finish the job, but I sure as hell will. Cartwright had been the true architect of the plot all along. The evidence, the framing, the lies, everything had been his doing. But why? What did Cartwright stand to gain from all of this? Cartwright had orchestrated the perfect revenge. Steele's pursuit of Caruso's organization had put both of their lives at risk. When Cartwright realized he was being pushed out of the investigation, he made the decision to frame Steele, using Rachel as a pawn in his twisted game. The final confrontation between Steele and Cartwright was inevitable. What neither man anticipated, however, was the quiet presence of a witness who had been watching the entire exchange from the shadows. A witness who would now hold the key to their survival and the truth. The courtroom had finally cleared, the echoes of justice settling into the cold walls. Jacob Steele had been exonerated, his name cleared of the horrific charges that had nearly destroyed his life. But victory came at a cost. The betrayal from within his own ranks left scars that would never truly heal. Rachel Myers had been arrested and charged with conspiracy, but her actions weren't just a betrayal of a colleague. She had betrayed the very essence of trust that upheld the justice system. the system Steele had devoted his life to, and in the end, it was his system that had failed him. She, too, would face years of imprisonment, but it was the emotional scars, the erosion of trust, that would linger far beyond the courtroom. Rachel's involvement with Victor Caruso had been carefully concealed, but once exposed, it led to a cascade of investigations, unraveling a criminal web that stretched far beyond what Steele had ever imagined. Caruso's empire was finally dismantled, and many of his allies were arrested. The ramifications of the entire ordeal rippled through the department and the city, leaving a wake of unanswered questions. As for Cartwright, the man behind the real mastermind, he was arrested too. The former detective, once regarded as a trusted ally, would spend the rest of his life behind bars, his reputation shattered beyond repair. But Cartwright's betrayal wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a glimpse into a deeper, darker undercurrent within the law enforcement system itself. Cartwright's fall from grace was inevitable. Once his lies were exposed, there was no escaping the truth. But for Steele, it was a bittersweet victory. His life and career, forever altered by the events that transpired, would never return to the normalcy he once knew. Every case leaves behind lessons, some harder to learn than others. And for Jacob Steele, this case would forever change his understanding of justice, trust, and loyalty. Throughout his career, Steele had been lauded for his sharp mind, his ability to outthink the criminals who crossed his path. But in the end, it wasn't his intellect that failed him, it was his trust. Steele had placed his faith in the very people who turned on him when it mattered most. He had underestimated the darkness lurking in those closest to him. The events of the past year had forced Steele to face a stark truth. The justice system, like any institution, is fragile, can be corrupted, manipulated, and, most painfully, betrayed from within. Even the sharpest minds can be blindsided when the betrayal comes from those they trust the most. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this story isn't just the betrayal Steele endured. It's the understanding that trust, once shattered, is never quite the same. For Steele, the consequences of this betrayal were not just professional, but deeply personal. And as for justice, it had been served, but at what cost? In the end, no victory could fully restore what had been lost, not just for Steele, but for the entire system he had dedicated his life to. What do you think? Was Jacob Steele a victim of circumstance, or was he blind to the dangers lurking within his own ranks? And in a world built on trust, how can we ever be sure who the real enemy is? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What did we overlook? Did we miss a vital clue in the story? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. More gripping stories, more twists, and more shocking revelations that will keep you guessing. Your support helps bring these untold mysteries to light. Join us for the next case, and remember, justice doesn't always follow the path we expect. Stay sharp and keep questioning. See you in the next video.